to have her, and we're all going to be polite by silencing our phones. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Mary.
Thanks for having me. Just to introduce myself, my name is Mary Fricke. My full name is Mary Christina Hall Field Fricke, and I'll show you a little bit about why that's important in a few minutes. I'm an amateur genealogist, so just to set your expectations, okay? I'm not going to come out with any real earth-shattering news or anything here. But I thought, you know, if you're interested in family history, you might be interested to hear about an interesting family. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some prominent family members in world history, and some interesting adventures, as they've told me. They think my trip to Scotland last summer was an interesting adventure. So I'll tell you a little bit about how that plays into the family history. And I'm going to show some slides, so I hope you can see them. We're going to get started with a little bit about where I found some of the information. I was lucky in that my father did a lot of research into our family history, and Field is my maiden name, and it's a well-known name, goes way back into England. And luckily, we've had access to a book that was published around 1900, 1901, that detailed the history of the family going way back to the time of William the Conqueror. Certainly, come on in. Thanks for coming. So, let me just the next. So this is just a little early history. You can read it if you can see that. It's an ancient name, Field. It's gone by different variations, like Delafield, Feld. So there's just different originations from it, but it has to do with the woods or the land that's been cleared into fields way back in England. It goes back to around 1000, so it's a very ancient name. And then there's just some information here about where my particular family originated from, the Alsace and Lorraine regions in France, and then they moved into England around the time of William the Conqueror. This is a depiction of our family crest. This is the motto, the family motto, sans du rein, without God, nothing. And this was a coat of arms that was given to Sir John Field, who was an astronomer back at the time of Princess Elizabeth, who later became Queen Elizabeth I. He was her astrologer. And he had a friend who was the astrologer to Queen Mary. And they both actually believed in Copernicus's theory of the Earth revolving around the sun, as opposed to what, at the time, people thought that the sun revolved around the Earth. And so this was like a major break with tradition. It was considered heresy to some at the time. And at one point, my ancestor and his friend were both jailed. And after some time, they actually got out, and they published a book with this theory in it, Copernicus's theory, and it became well known. And now it's what we believe. You know, it's true. So that was kind of interesting. And it went way back, and there's actually like a nobleman in our family tree. That was kind of cool. So this is just a list of our family tree members, and this is me. And I've been able to trace it back 20 generations to the first one that we've been able to find documentation on, back in the time of 1240. But it goes back a little further than that, but it's hard to find documentation. This is the astronomer here, Sir John Field, and that was in the 1500s. So it was really good that we had a lot of documentation about the family, so that we were able to trace from one generation to the next. It was also good that they each had sons, all the way down. Everybody had sons, so they were able to keep the name. And it went. there were some different spellings of it, but, hi.
I think these are Ann's.
Oh, okay.
Yes. They're some on the table, but
They're Lori's.
Oh, Lori's.
Oh, okay.
Any of this still
Thank
left
you,
out there?
Susan.
Yeah.
Okay.
These, up until this point, these people were all in England. And then we were able to identify the first Field family member who came to the New World, and he arrived in 1629, which was about 9 years after the Mayflower. So they were Puritans at the time, and they settled in New England. They actually, this fellow, Zachariah Field, settled the city of Hartford, which became the capital of Connecticut, which is where I'm from. And the family, largely remained in New England. But what was interesting about this fellow is that, all the other people I'm going to talk about were descended from him, from this one person who came to the New World. And he had many very prominent descendants from him. And then later on I'll talk about the Scottish side, and that was my father's mother's side of the family, but this is my father's side of the family. So this is the fella that was the first one to come to the New World. And this year I was lucky enough to find his grave. It wasn't too hard to find, but I never knew about it before. And I went to visit it with my brother. And somebody told us to go to this cemetery, that the marker was there, and we didn't know what to look for. And it was a pretty big cemetery, and I just decided that I was going to look for the biggest marker I could find and see if that would be him. And sure enough, it was, because he was a very prominent member of that community and helped found it in Massachusetts. So he was actually, he lived there until 1666, and that would be my 8th great-grandfather. So it was very, very cool. He actually founded Hartford, Connecticut, along with some other settlers, and then he moved to Massachusetts. And in the area where they moved, in the area of Deerfield, there were a number of the Field family that settled there. There was a big massacre. If anyone knows anything about Massachusetts history, the Indians came and there was a big massacre, and they actually abducted one of my ancestors and took her off to live with the Indians. Years later, she came back to visit, but decided to stay with the Indians because by then she'd become, part of the family, I guess. So very interesting, neat little things you can find out, as you dig into history. And some of this history is available in local small town history books because they talk about the families who settled there. So there's a lot of information available there if you go to local libraries in these little towns. It's really kind of cool. So here's just a very, very rough drawing. My father did this of all of the not all of them, but many of the prominent Field family members who descended from this one Zachariah Field. And he had lots of sons, and they all procreated. And so you can see down here, this is where I am, all the way down at the bottom. Okay, and this is the direct line. I also have 2 brothers. But some of these, he's pointed out their profession or something that they were known for, and I'll talk about those on different slides. But what you can see, too, is there's little number marks and volume and page numbers. These refer to that book that I was telling you about in the beginning. So that he was able to identify which volume book it is, because it's a 2-volume book. Each volume is 700 pages each. So there's a lot of people in there. And then the page number and the actual number of the ancestor, because they're all numbered in the book. It's very helpful to have that. Obviously not everybody has that available. But we're going to talk about some of these people, this one, this one, this one, this one, and these. So I'll show you a little bit more about some of those. So Erastus Salisbury Field, okay, he was an artist, okay. This is him over here, okay, so you can kind of see how we're related. And he was known for these grand portrait paintings, epic murals, and this is the Garden of Eden, his depiction of the Garden of Eden. I have this print hanging in my living room. It's very interesting. You can look at it for hours and find all kinds of things. There's the apple tree, there's the snake in there, it's really kind of neat. The original hangs in a museum, I think, in Vermont. And then this one he painted, and that was going to be displayed in the Centennial Exposition in 1876. That was like the World's Fair of the time. So that was really quite a prominent painting. And he did other portraits. There's some that are displayed at the Red Lion in Massachusetts. Where is it? Stockbridge, Massachusetts. A lot of family members ended up there. Here's a few others. Eugene Field, you might know the name. He's a poet, a children's poet. He wrote Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. Nice children's poet. Little Boy Blue, that was kind of a sad poem. But he was quite a character, and he worked on a newspaper. He settled in St. Louis. He also worked in Denver. And he was quite the prankster, apparently. I'm reading a biography of him now. And it's very interesting. And it's who my brother was named after. His name is also Eugene Field. And I'll show you some other slides about them. Cyrus Westfield was known for being the person who managed to lay the Atlantic cable across the Atlantic Ocean so that you could have a telegraph call, telegraph back and forth between Newfoundland and Ireland. And he did everything from figuring out what the cable needed to be coated with so that it would withstand the ocean, to outfitting a ship so that it could unwind the cable as they sailed across the ocean. They actually had two ships meeting in the middle of the ocean and then splice the cable together. Now, it didn't work on the first try. They had some failures, and it actually took about 13 years, I think, from conception to when they actually got it working. But, it saved a lot of time, and it was really kind of interesting. And then this fellow was his brother. They actually had a whole family of brothers that were all kind of well-known and very accomplished. So this is Stephen Johnson Field. He was a lawyer, and he actually was appointed to the Supreme Court by Abraham Lincoln. And they had a whole congregation of people who went to Washington from California, where he was practicing, and they all went on his behalf and nominated him to be, the Supreme Court Justice. And Abraham Lincoln did nominate him, and he was unanimously approved. So here's some of the poets' works. You can see Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. It's still in print. It's a very popular book. It's great to give your grandkids, great grandkids, It's a good baby shower gift. Very cute. And then he's got whole books of poems. And in St. Louis, they have a museum where his house was. His house is now a museum. So if you're ever out there, it would be interesting. He also wrote The Gingham Dog and the Calico Cat, which is really kind of a cute poem. Yeah.
Golden book.
Yeah. This is just about the Atlantic cable. So it went from Newfoundland over to Ireland, and this is the ship, the Great Eastern, that actually rolled the cable out. And they had bad weather, and they had financial difficulties getting financing and everything. So.
Do you know how long a cable was used?
The first one didn't last very long at all, and so then they had to do another whole expedition and do it again. But I'm not really sure. Some of this stuff you can actually find in Wikipedia, which is great. You can look up anything in Wikipedia. But yeah, they have some details about that in there.
Do you know if that one was laid before the one that went from Maine?
It was the first. It was the first. And they went from the shortest distance, from Newfoundland to Ireland. But they had other smaller pieces of it that needed to go from Newfoundland to the United
Yeah,
States
yeah.
and to New York, and so it was done in stages. And then you might have heard about Marshall Field's in Chicago,
Oh, yeah.
big department store. So again, that was another relation, and I can go back and show you where he was. So here's the poet, here's the artist, here's Marshall Field, the merchant. Okay, so you can see, and then he had, descendants, of course. But just to put things into perspective so you can see that. So Marshall Field was a self-made man. He got into the dry goods business and established Marshall Field and Company, which grew to be a very prominent department store. This is the interior of it. I've been there. It's beautiful. It's very ornate, and this clock is well known on the corner of the building, right there in Chicago. And he became wealthy and well known. None of it passed down to me. And he gave his name to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, where they house the Tyrannosaurus Rex that they uncovered, and I've been there and seen
It's an
that.
awesome museum.
Yeah. And he also donated quite a substantial sum to found University of Chicago. So he was very philanthropic. And then we have another author, Rachel Lyman Field, who was more modern. She lived until 1942, but she was inspired, I think, by the family history and the other writers in the family. So probably the most well-known, there's two. There's Hitty, Her First 100 Years, which is a children's book. It won the National Book Award, the Newbery Award. And it's a book told about 100 years during the existence from the point of view of a doll. So all the owners of the doll, and it's really cute, very sweet. And it's also a great book to give as a gift to a little girl.
Is it still in publication?
Yes.
Really?
You can get it on Amazon. Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so.
And then she wrote an adult book too, All This in Heaven Too, which was a movie. They made it into a movie with Charles Boyer and Betty Davis, and they play this on TCM every once in a while. It's a great movie. It's about a governess who falls in love with the master of the house, and there's a big scandal, and she's French, and she leaves and gets on a ship to go to the New World. And on that ship, she meets a minister who she later marries. Well, that minister was also a relative of mine, so this is actually a true story. And she's writing it about her great uncle, who was the minister who married the governess. So it's really neat. And there's a picture of her dog. So this is a good book too. You can get this book as well. All This in Heaven Too. It's very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears and talk about the other side of the family. This is the Scottish side, and I have two clans in our background. It's the Macaulay and the McCraig clans. These are their tartans. And how I came to be here today was I was talking to some of my friends in the knitting group, and Lori, who's on the Friends of the Library board, and telling them about my trip to Scotland last year, because I always wanted to go to Scotland. It was a big birthday year for me last year, so I decided to treat myself to a trip to the family homeland. And my father had never gotten to go there, so I wanted to go. And so I asked around my family to see if anybody wanted to go with me, because I didn't want to go alone. And so my cousin offered to go with me, and so we planned a trip, and it was really great. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned there. In Scotland, ancestral tourism is a big thing. If you have any Scottish in your background, it's a great place to visit. This is a picture I took. This is actually an island off the coast of Scotland. It's called the Isle of Lewis. It's the other half of the Isle of Harris, where Harris tweed is made. And this is where my great-great-grandparents came from in the mid-1800s. They lived on this island. And it was a rough life. There's fishing, there's storms, the winters are terrible. They don't have any trees, so there wasn't wood for burning. They had to dig peat out of the ground and dry it for fuel. So it was a rough life. And in the mid-1800s, a lot of people left Scotland and Ireland and came over this part of the family came to Canada, and they settled there. And I was lucky to have inherited a written account of my great-grandmother's journey from this island to Canada when she was about 5 or 6 years old. She lived quite a long time and recalled this story, and my aunt wrote it down and shared it with the family. Now, my aunt is 95 years old today, so this story kind of lasted a long time, and I was glad to get it. So I used it to follow in the footsteps to find where my ancestors came from. So I also, in doing my research before I went on the trip, I got in contact with the local historical society on the island. And this fellow was the head of the historical society, Donnie Morrison. And he was very helpful in providing me some information, and we stayed in contact as I was making my arrangements. And he also is involved with this Hebridean Connections, which is a very good resource for anybody looking for information about their ancestors from, any time from the mid-1700s on. It's a great website. And I was able to not only find information about my family on this website, but also contribute some information to update it. So when we went over there, I made arrangements to meet him, and he was very gracious, and he provided me with a booklet of all the information about where my family lived when they were there, what their addresses were, what happened to them, where they emigrated to. It was amazing that they had this information, and I thought that was great. But then he offered to take me on a tour of all the villages where they lived. And he did, and he took me and my cousin, and we went. He showed us the ruins of the homes that my ancestors actually lived in, which was really kind of neat. Not only that, but I sent that story to the Historical Society magazine that they run, and they published it, and they published it in a series. So they actually put a picture of my great-grandmother on the cover, as well as, this is harder to see, but this is her with her two sisters, one of whom is my grandmother. These are her three children. And so they did it in a series, and then they put my picture on there. and that's my father. He was quite into the Scottish, as you can tell. He was a bagpiper. So I thought that was kind of cool. I walked into the historical society there, and people said, "Oh, I know you. Look." So that was kind of funny. Not only that, they put my picture in the newspaper with my cousin, and put us on their website, the local town website, talking about ancestral tourism.
We're famous in all the pubs.
Yeah, yeah, we went to a few pubs.
Can't help it over there. So many.
But this is something that I thought was really interesting. These are the ruins of the homes where my family lived when they were there. They used to be close to the water when they only had boats. Then when they made roads, they built them closer to the roads, and they just let the other ones fall apart. And then I found out that there's this very popular set of books in Scotland called Katie Morag. and it's about this little girl that lives in this home that's a post office, and her parents run the post office and general store. And the books are very popular, and they became a TV series over there. And so when they were filming the series and looking for a place to film it, they found the property that used to be my family's property. And they took the old building and they renovated it and made it look brand new. And so they made movies about it, you know, so that was really neat. And you can see these on YouTube. If you look on YouTube for Katie Morag, they have some little clips of the TV series on there. They're really kind of cute. You know, the girl's about 9 or 10 and her adventures. And so, you know, while I was over there, I visited the local cemetery where, you know, my family members would have been buried, and found a lot, you know, with the same last name. And so knowing that, you know, my father had never been able to visit Scotland, I brought along a lock of his hair that I'd had, and I buried it next to these guys,
That's nice.
so, along with a lock of mine. So we're both there forever. So this is just a depiction. I know you're probably familiar with Ancestry.com, but this is Genie.com, and this is what I use to keep track of the family history, because it's free. You don't have to subscribe. You know, you have to put your email address in, whatever, create a profile. But you know, you're able to put in pictures, email addresses of living relatives, birth dates, you know, all important dates on the timeline, and then, you know, build it, you know. So I've got something like 5,000 people in mine right now. But it's a really cool program that I like to use. There's some other resources that are helpful. The library here apparently doesn't have access to Ancestry.com. Some libraries do, so if you're not from around here, if you have access to another library, you can check, and you might be able to do some research on Ancestry.com. Like I mentioned, the local town historical societies or history books having to do with the people who founded towns and settled early, you'll find information there as well. There's also Heritage
Quest is
Heritage
library.
Quest. Yeah, they do have access to that here, and that gives you access to the census records, which are a great source of information.
Oh, they have Heritage Quest here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's some interesting TV shows on these days. If you're just interested in anyone's
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night, there's Finding Your Roots, which is a good one. They profile celebrities and their backgrounds. There's the Long Lost Family. Long Lost Family, that's a new series about people who were adopted and reunited and things like that. There's Who Do You Think You Are? Again, that also follows celebrities. And Genealogy Roadshow. That's kind of fun too. That's more about regular people, you know. So that's pretty much my presentation. So I wanted to see if you have questions. You know, what?
I have a question. Usually your last name means something.
Mm-hmm.
So what does your last name mean besides the Field?
Well, Field, that's the family name. I mean, it means a field, you know, like a field that doesn't have any woods on it, you know. So it's pretty lame. But at one point, my father was introduced to a fellow named Mr. Meadows, and he said, "Oh, I'm Mr. Field," and the guy punched him because he thought he was joking.
That's so funny. You made that up.
And now my married name is Fricke. My husband is Fricke, and that's a German name, and they call him Fricke, and I'm Frack, you know.
Right.
But no kidding, he has lunch every day with a guy named Fracker. You can't make this up.
How
The Alsace Lorraine, I've got ancestry from there too. So it's-
Well, you know, as you research, you might find you're related to people. You know, I mean, Jerry over here and I were doing some research at her house, and we think we're related. You know, I mean, you go back far enough, everybody's
Right,
related.
well, we came through, families were at the same place in Connecticut,
Yeah,
and in that same area,
yeah, yeah. So,
But that was the migration routes. People were in the same places. There weren't that many places for them to be. If there was a river, you were somewhere on that river, because that's how they traveled.
that's right.
I mean, there were trees everywhere else. You couldn't go any other
Especially
way.
after the
So
St.
you went
Lawrence
the
Seaway
migration
was
routes on the
opened up.
river.
Yeah, yeah. And so you never know what you might find as you look through.
Yeah, you have to be emotionally prepared too, because sometimes you find things out that you
Yeah.
go, whoa.
Yeah.
That's the fun part.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
Those
is.
I
are the
think
stories.
I
Yeah.
found one of my relatives, I think she was older than she really said she was, and I think she was older than her husband, but I don't know that he knew that, you know.
Yeah. I think it's probably harder for a lot of families that where they don't, not a lot of reputable people, but like in your
Yes.
family, there are all these reputable people in history, so there's a lot more documentation and
Yeah.
easier to,
Well,
maybe
you
a
know,
little easier to trace a lot of it.
my father did a lot of this in the days when there wasn't any internet. You know, it's so much easier now with the internet. And those census records are invaluable because you can find out where people lived, and even if you don't know the address, you know, you might find other family members who live near them, because people live near each other, you know, so you just look on the next street or the next house, and, you know, it might be your relatives. And it gives ages, and, you know, so you
And
can
that's
figure out
not just
birth
famous
dates.
people, that's everybody
Yeah,
had
it's
to be in the
everybody.
census.
And now they have,
Even
this-
did them in jails,
yeah,
hospitals.
yeah, there's other scheduled, property schedules and things you can learn about the property people had. And they have the census data available through 1940.
Right.
The 1950 census won't be available till 2020.
Yeah,
Right, so
they're
every
12 years
77.
apart, I think.
Oh, I thought there were 10.
They have to be
I
out
think they're
72
They have
years
to be
before they'll
70,
print it.
yeah,
Yeah,
some years.
yeah.
Right,
Why?
to protect
It's
privacy.
yeah, privacy concerns and stuff.
Yeah.
It is. It's a, people don't want to answer anyway, and if you felt like you were gonna be alive, well, that information could be released. They wouldn't get accurate information.
That was one of the weird things we found looking at my mom's side, because there were a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe on my mom's side, and she said they used to all hide from the
Exactly.
census, because they were like, they
Exactly.
didn't want to be recorded, because
Right.
you didn't want your name in any books if you came, you know, because that was like
Well, and where they
scary
were coming
stuff.
from too, the
Exactly.
people that were running things
It's
were the ones
scary.
you didn't want to go
Right.
to.
Let me see your papers, no,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
And we're
Exactly
reliving
right.
this today.
yes,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing in my family is his name spelled different. The way
Yes.
we pronounce
Yeah.
the pronunciation, and they took it for a different alphabet number,
Right.
and letter, and so that's what we ran into.
If people come through Ellis Island and the person who's
Right.
checking them in doesn't know how to spell the name, so they snip, you know.
The person giving them the
Yeah,
name
they
doesn't
just
know how
shorten
to
it.
spell it.
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's about 7 different
Yeah, so you have to look up different spellings, you know,
Yeah,
even
Frickle's
in
probably
this,
made up
there's
name.
different
Frickle's
spellings.
a made up name.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought I'd share this because
Very
it might
cool.
inspire you to, you know, do some research and find some interesting people
Just,
in your
just a
background.
little information about, libraries are wonderful sources for info, and we are blessed to have some great libraries for genealogy in our area. Not necessarily this library, but the Tampa Library is wonderful. The one downtown, the German, John H. German, or whatever the name of the library is, right by the Performing Arts. And it's got a great, whole second floor is genealogy. And they've got mostly on film, they've got all the census records, but they've got a lot of Florida info, actual documents. But if you go to the Dunedin Library, then their specialty is grave records. And that's for all over. And then if you go to St. Pete Library, their specialty is kind of like the war records, Civil War, and you know. And so you find out. And then Orlando's got a wonderful library for genealogy. For bound family histories. So
And
do
we
your
will-
research and just get out there and
Well,
go.
the Church of Latter-day Saints also has.
Well,
There's something about the Civil War.
Yeah, they have records about all different kinds of things, finding female ancestors, horses and mules during the war years, I mean, with Confederate ancestors.
Mary,
Yeah.
I noticed that all of your relatives all are men.
Well, no,
that's-
that's only the ones that I put up on the chart, you know. Obviously, they got married and had children.
she's just following the Field surname.
Daughters, they
Yes.
didn't have a boy to bring.
Right.
Yeah, but a lot of times they didn't record. They would only record sons.
Shoot, oh, okay.
Well-
Because those are the ones that are carrying on.
Yeah, just to be able to follow the name.
Yeah.
The women probably did all the work, but the men got all the credit.
Mary, what paper was that
To
in?
admit that, but I did.
Recently?
Yes. Well,
Is there any interest, I know some of you sound like you've done some genealogy, is there some interest in getting together maybe sometime on a Tuesday night or maybe during the day sometime or on a Saturday or someplace once a month and get together and just doing some genealogy?
It'd be nice to go like to library.
Because I'm happy to help with that, and some of you can probably help too. But if you need to tell the friends of the library, and you need to tell the librarians that you're interested, and we could just meet right out where we are tonight someplace, and I'd be happy to help. And I'm sure there's a lot of others that
Well,
would
we're
Jerry
really,
knows a lot
really
about
help.
Ancestry.com.
The Friends of the Library will see if we can find enough money to get the Ancestry.com back in this library.
It's very expensive.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, the point is that we have a lot of people who support the Friends. I brought in some folders. It's $10 a year to become a friend. And we sponsor all kinds of programs here at the library. Thank you. No, these are not mine.
Oh, they are?
No, they look.
Those are yours.
No, they're not.
Well, they're not mine.
Anybody want to buy a pair of glasses?
They were on the table.
Yeah.
They were on the table. I thought they were.
Oh, I thought. But anyway, we do support many programs, everything from the preschoolers that meet here. Jerry and I have seen the preschoolers. We have really about 50 preschoolers that come here and in the other room where they're voting today. It's a wonderful program, but we do all kind of programs for teenagers, and then we have different things, programs on Tuesday nights here that sometimes we have to pay for, and we
But if you're interested in doing
Well,
genealogy, let us know.
yes, and if there is an interest and we don't have the money, it's through the sponsorship of the Friends that we can then say to our head librarian here, you know, there are enough people who are interested, we will give the money if you do that, so.
But even
Like a
if,
sign-up sheet?
but if you
Yeah,
don't, we
right,
can help in another
But
way.
we can
each
also
other.
count how many people are here tonight, we've had a great
Yeah.
turnout.
Yes.
And they do this,
We're having
have a
board
program
meeting
like this
tomorrow, so-
periodically. But anyway, so there was actually a gentleman in my family who married a woman who was a relative of Ethan Allen, so there was some other prominent
So you've
people.
got it all
Yeah.
shopping, furniture.
Right.
The gene is there.
Sorry, Mary, I promise I wouldn't.
That's okay. I'm just glad you had me, and I hope you found it interesting.
You're great.
Very good, yeah, very good.